Good evening, everybody. Sorry, there was a slight delay. I'm just getting used to recording via Zoom to go into my Facebook group. So welcome tonight to my next installment around SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and its links to IBS and IBS symptoms. And tonight I wanted to just very quickly recap about what I talked about last week and what SIBO is in case you missed it. But really, the important thing tonight is to talk about how you can potentially test for it to know if that is really what is occurring if you experience the symptoms I will describe in a moment, and then what you can do as self-help techniques that can help this situation and hopefully try and help get some relief from the symptoms that you're experiencing. So SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. This is where certain strains of pathogenic bacteria decide to thrive and grow in your small intestines. This is a site when we shouldn't really have hardly any bacteria at all. Most of them should be in the colon. So they start to reside in the small intestines. And when they're there, it's a site of digestion. And therefore food can be passing through that isn't yet fully digested, hasn't yet been fully digested and absorbed into your bloodstream. And these bacteria can start to feed and ferment the bacteria, the food. And from that, they're giving off gases. It creates bloating, distension, discomfort. It can create pain. And these strains of bacteria may either cause constipation or diarrhea, or you may end up with a mixture of the two. And this is why you may wonder what on earth is going on. And it's why now it has been recognized from research that 2/3 of IBS symptoms is actually due to this SIBO phenomenon that's going on. And, you know, it's quite amazing to think that 20 years ago, we had not even heard of this. It's really come to light in the last 10 years, definitely in the last 5. If you're a sufferer, you may have heard of SIBO because you start to research what could be going on. And yet, if you go to your doctor, the chances are, I've yet to hear actually a doctor who has heard of SIBO. Of course, they've heard of IBS, but not yet heard of SIBO. And I'm not expecting a general practitioner to know the next steps to take, but that's when they might refer you to a gastroenterologist. So I've talked about the symptoms, but what we do know is that not all IBS is SIBO. SIBO will contribute to IBS symptoms or be the cause of IBS symptoms, but not all IBS is SIBO. So how on earth can you detect what on earth is going on in your small intestines? It's completely invisible. How do you know what's going on there? How can you try and work out what this problem is? Well, there are some solutions and some tests that you can do. So all is not lost, but there are pros and there are cons. So I do need to make you aware of this. Now, the main test that is known about for SIBO detection is a breath test. And this is where you swallow, you follow the pre-prep guidelines to do with diet. And it's when you swallow a sugar solution. And once you've swallowed that sugar solution, you start to collect the breath, which will detect gases over a 100-minute cycle. It could be over much longer than that, but actually it's in the first 100 minutes that can detect if you've got these bacteria residing there. Because what happens is that when you swallow these sugar solutions, the bacteria, if it is in the small intestines, as I said, will start to feed off it, will start to ferment it, and will create these specific gases. Hydrogen gas and methane gases are the two main ones. Now, there are different types of sugar solutions. Often you may see out there that there's a glucose solution, and this isn't the one that I use in my practice with clients because glucose is very, very quickly absorbed in the small intestines higher up. And the small intestines is a really, 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 really long tube. It wiggles around and it's very long for a reason. It helps to create the maximum place to digest your food fully and ensure you are extracting the nutrients from its food, and that you've got the opportunity to extract all the nutrients and for the nutrients to be absorbed into your bloodstream, which is where you need it to feed all your cells. So the tube is very, very long, the small intestines, and sugar happens to, glucose sugar is absorbed very high up in the small intestines. So if the bacteria is much lower down, because there isn't one place where these bacteria live, if they're much lower down, you could end up getting a false negative result from carrying out a glucose breath test, because glucose solution is being absorbed quite quickly and the bacteria hasn't had a chance to, hasn't reached the bacteria, they haven't fermented it, haven't created these gases. The test I use if I'm going to do breath testing is a lactulose solution, because this travels through the whole of the small intestines and does not get absorbed, and therefore the bacteria has a chance to feed off it and ferment it. There's potentially one downside with the test in that the lactulose solution can help a constipation type situation, so it can move through quite quickly, but it is, in my opinion, the best test out there to try and help detect these gases. And as I said, at the moment, with the breath test available in the UK, you can detect hydrogen and methane gases. So that's really positive. And I've got a test here on my desk at the moment where one of my clients has done that test, and it's really detected high levels of methane gas. So we can see from that test that there's methane bacteria that's living in the small intestines and is a contributor to the symptoms that my client is experiencing. There is another downside to this test, and as I said, we're learning about this all the time. Well, like everything I do, we're always constantly learning. But there's now known to be another type of bacteria that when they ferment the food can create another gas called hydrogen sulfide. Well, actually what happens in this situation is that the hydrogen that's produced by the first level of bacteria is then used to feed the hydrogen sulfide bacteria, i.e. they give off hydrogen sulfide. But as yet, as far as I know in the UK, you cannot test for hydrogen sulfide in this test. So if you see a low score of hydrogen in the test and you're thinking, well, that's not a SIBO picture, it can be. It's just that the hydrogen's been used by hydrogen sulfide bacteria and we can't detect that yet on the breath test, and they may come out as negative. And this is where I have to use my clinical experience and skills and looking at client symptoms to sort of try and understand the picture that's going on. First and foremost in my practice, I use stool testing, because this enables us, when you use a very good quality test, to detect hydrogen bacteria, methane bacteria, hydrogen sulfide bacteria. Yes, if it shows up in the stool test, it does not necessarily mean they are in the small intestines. They could be in the colon. But if you've got these high level of these symptoms going on that look like a SIBO picture, and you can see the bacteria in the stool test, then you can sort of put the two and two together. I may map onto that with, obviously a client's agreement to do the breath testing on top of that, because that gives another level of certainty with methane anyway. But I tend to use a particular stool test company that you can only get through practitioners that I consider to be the best on the market, because it's using DNA technology, very, very accurate, really good picture of what's going on. So that's the situation where we're at the moment. Testing can be very useful, may give a false negative, very good at detecting methane gases, but it's sort of about putting the two pictures together. I might use stool testing, I look at client symptoms, we may add in the breath testing, and collectively that really, really helps to form an opinion of what might be going on. Now, when we've got that information available, it's then a case of what do we do? What can I do to help correct and overcome this SIBO problem? What can I do to try and shift this bacteria that's been living in my small intestines and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere? Of course, first and foremost, it's thinking about the diet, because as I said, the bacteria is fed from certain types of sugars and certain types of carbohydrates. And this is where a FODMAP type diet can be particularly useful initially. If you starve these bacteria of this fuel source, then you're going to sort of reduce numbers. I'm not going to say you're going to clear it completely, but you're going to reduce numbers. The problem is when you put the FODMAP and the food and the fuel source back in again, you're going to start feeding what's there. So the first thing is to try and reduce numbers down with a FODMAP type diet, and that's where FODMAPs is useful. However, it's very, very important that you do not spend long on a FODMAP diet, because that is a fuel source for your beneficial bacteria. And what we don't want to do is start restricting your good bacteria, because then you're setting up a problem elsewhere in the colon that's not going to be helpful. We've got to protect the good bacteria. So you should never follow a FODMAP diet for more than about 6 to 8 weeks. And if you've been on a FODMAP diet for longer than that, I'm afraid it's really, really not good news for your beneficial bacteria in the colon. So FODMAPs, short and sweet, 6 to 8 weeks, can be very, very helpful. You may find, and many people do, when they do that, they find that it's really helped to relieve symptoms, but it's not a long-term solution. What we have to start thinking about is using antimicrobial herbs. And again, we need to be quite careful, because like antibiotics, which are very, very strong and powerful for killing off bacteria, these strong antimicrobial herbs are also going to destroy good beneficial bacteria. And like I said, we don't want to be doing that. We want to try and protect them. So we can go in with some certain types of gentle antimicrobial herbs. The good ones will help protect the beneficial bacteria. And again, it's about going in short and sweet. You might do a 1 month course, have a month off and go back on for another month. There's different types like berberine and garlic, allicin, that can be very, very helpful. Maybe a little bit of oregano, maybe a little bit of wormwood, but we have to, begin, as I said, be quite careful what we're utilizing and not to do it for too long. Now, the big thing that we need to focus on when we are thinking about how do we try and stop this bacteria residing there, and how can we stop it coming back, or indeed, if you're listening to this for the first time, how can you stop it happening in the first place? And this is where we think about looking after this migrating motor complex situation, this phenomenon that takes place, which is this sweeping cleansing action of clearing debris and bacteria subsequent to a meal. And this sort of brushing, sweeping action that occurs along the small intestines, starting from the stomach and going down the small intestines, kicks in 4 to 5 hours after eating. So if you have the minutest of snacks, your body is automatically going to go into that peristaltic motion, propelling food through the small intestines and through the colon, rather than this sweeping action and cleansing action that occurs along the small intestines to get rid of things like bacteria that's residing there. So snacking is an absolute no-no at all times, really, when we think about SIBO, particularly when we've got SIBO, but really to try and prevent it. And, you know, why have people got so many IBS symptoms and SIBO occurring? Well, it's potentially part of this snacking culture that we all tend to follow. So snacking has to go. If you want to try and overcome it, you've got to have these 4 to 5 hour windows when you don't eat. And if you're feeling hungry, you need to adjust what you're eating at your other meals to make sure that they are really satisfying you and keeping you full between meals. And working with a practitioner who can help you with that is really important. So no snacking if you've got SIBO and you want a chance to overcome it, to help get rid of this debris and bacteria that's thriving there. And at nighttime, this 12-hour minimum window, this fasting state of a minimum of 12 hours between your evening meal and your next meal the next day, breakfast, is imperative, really, because this 90-minute cycle, this migrating motor complex sweeping cleansing action occurs in 90-minute cycles, will happen repeatedly overnight. So we want to maximize that happening at nighttime when you're sleeping. So 12-hour window. If you're eating at 8 o'clock at night, you don't eat again till 8 o'clock in the morning. 7 o'clock at night, you don't eat before 7 o'clock the next morning. You don't even go and have a few nuts or a satsuma or a little bit of yogurt or something like that close to bedtime. You need that 12-hour window. That's what's really, really, really important. I can't stress that enough. Now, some of these things you might think they're going to be hard to implement and hard to do. Over and above the diet and using this fasting state and not snacking, there are specific what we call prokinetic supplements and herbs that can encourage this migrating motor complex action to occur between meals. And in my practice, I use a lot of prebiotics, which are helping to protect and feed the good bacteria if you're also using antimicrobial herbs. So it really takes a concerted effort. There is no one size fits all that we know of at the moment that works. We have to tweak and adjust this. We have to come back and revisit things. We have to look at what's going on with symptoms. It can be overcome, but it's not easy, and we have to stay on top of the game. You know, this going back to snacking is really not a solution if you're suffering, and you're suffering in a big way. You've got to keep at it and keep on it. But help is at hand. It is possible to get relief from those symptoms, but you do need to follow the step-by-step protocols, certainly with the diet, antimicrobial herbs, and stopping this snacking and following this sort of fasting approach in between meals and at nighttime is so important. So thank you for watching. Do remember you can find all of my videos on my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health. I think there's about 150 there now. Can't quite remember, but there are a lot. And I'll be back next Tuesday night with my next installment, probably around gut health and digestive health, because I'm on a bit of a flow with that at the moment. It might be a nutrition in the news topic, depending on what I find that's out there at the moment. So do join me next week. Thank you for watching and have a great week, everybody. Bye.